If I were to sum up the Vivo X27 into one word, it would have to be classy. It has an exceptionally beautiful design filled with innovation and statement, but at the same time subtle and gentle. That being said, even the classiest things in life can lack a certain swagger that its competitors hold high. The X27 is wrapped in Gorilla Glass from front to back, with the back having side curves big enough to make the entire back feel curved, making for a very comfortable experience. The only cutout on their rear is for the triple lens camera setup, which has absolutely no camera bump whatsoever. I have never seen this implemented so well in a phone before. I remember stating in my Xiaomi Mi 9 review that I would have preferred a thicker phone than such a massive bump. Seriously, Xiaomi holds records for biggest camera bump on the Mi 9. And Vivo have heard me and done exactly that. Yes, the phone has jumped up to 9mm in thickness, but the lack of a camera bump just makes me smile with joy. The curves I mentioned a moment ago certainly help with the thickness of the phone, but due to this, no camera bump and a bit of a slippery back, the phone tends to become a bit of a fidget spinner when on a flat surface. The backdrop color here is described as gold, but to me looks like more of a white, pink and light gold throwing into each other under different lighting conditions. Like I said, this is a classy phone. The frame of the phone is coated in a subtle gold paint that mixes in well with the pinkish back and all black front. There is a power button on the right hand side of the frame, along with the volume rocker, which is clicky, and holding the down key can be customized to any third-party app or shortcut of your choice for convenience. On the left hand side, we have a textured AI button, which cannot be very customized, but can be changed to game space, voice assistant, or my personal favorite, image recognizer, which allows you to extract any on-display text and even translate the entire content of the screen. At the top of the display, we have two sweet dispositions. The first being a headphone jack, which Vivo have thankfully kept present and sounding good with a decent pair of wide cans. Second being a pop-up selfie cam, which feels sturdy and looks stunning thanks to its LED light strips, which can indeed be customized in the settings menu. Jumping down to the bottom of the frame, we find the dual SIM tray, which unfortunately does not support a microSD card, but since the phone comes in a 256GB variant, there isn't much room for complaints. Beside it lays the USB Type-C port, which is a big deal since Vivo's previous X series devices have been limited to micro USB. But keep in mind this is USB 2.0, so don't expect the fastest OTG speeds. Next to the charging port, we find a single downfiring speaker, which sounds rich and clear with high volume levels and no distortion. Speaking of speakers, we have a physical earpiece speaker neatly tucked away at the top of the display, which is clear when talking on a call and doubles up as a second stereo speaker too, but not very loud when it comes to media playback. So I suggest sticking to earphones if you want a fully immersive experience. Below the earpiece, we are treated to a bezel-less 6.39-inch Super AMOLED Full HD Plus display. Thanks to the pop-up camera, Vivo have managed to keep the top and side bezels extremely thin. The bottom chin is Vivo's smallest to date and is equivalent to the one seen on the Xiaomi Mi 9. The display itself is vivid and bright thanks to it being a Super AMOLED panel, same as Samsung's. It is relatively bright and can still be comfortably viewed outdoors even when in direct sunlight. The most important aspect of this display though is its immersive feeling when watching a video or gaming, since there are no notches or bezels present. When you are not immersing yourself in entertainment and decide to give your phone a nap, you are treated to an always-on display with plenty interesting options. Lift the phone up and the fingerprint icon is displayed indicating where your finger should be placed in order to jump into FunTouch 9.0. The fingerprint sensor is an optical one, unlike Samsung's new ultrasonic one, so it is less secure but makes up for it in speed. Optical scanners are not the most reliable, but this is Vivo's 6th attempt and I must say it's almost perfect. Provided I place my finger in the right spot, it works at least 95% of the time. The scanner animation also has a few unusual but delightful options to choose from. Unfortunately, there is no form of Face ID here, as the camera is on a pop-up mechanism. Once you enter into FunTouch 9.0, which is based on Android 9 Pie, you feel a sense of stock that was lacking in FunTouch 4.5. Things just look cleaner and simpler. However, FunTouch is not everyone's cup of tea, and it is far from stock once you start digging deeper into it. Firstly, there is bloatware, Vivo bloatware. Apps you cannot uninstall, but pop them in a folder and disable them, and you'll never know that they're there. There is also no app drawer, so you're gonna have to put in some extra effort to neaten up your home screen. Next, we have an issue with using a third-party launcher. You can enable another launcher and set it to default, but no matter what you do, there is no way around getting it to stay. Once you go home, it reverts back to FunTouch OS every time. However, this is not the phone I would say necessarily needs a third-party launcher. Its software is different for sure, but I have used a few Vivo phones and I must say, not only has it improved, but I actually prefer it to most. Let me show you why. Firstly, you can customize the home screen grid layout, which is something that was lacking in the Mi 9. You can also change the shape of icons across the board, making all icons more square or more rounded with a limitless slider. You can use full screen gestures that actually make sense by sliding up from the right to go back, up from the middle to go home, and up and hold from the middle to view recent apps. Most importantly for me, Vivo allows you to enable control center and can be used by sliding up from the bottom left. This is similar to what you find in an iOS device, and though it may seem like a bit of a copy, it's more of Vivo mixing up Android and iOS beautifully. Once in control center, you can easily reach important things with one hand. The important things being brightness, volume, shortcut setting buttons, and most importantly, easier access to recent apps. With recent apps open in the background, you can easily switch between them, close them, or lock them in control center with just one hand. There is also an option for shortcut cards, but this is only really for Chinese users since it relates to their most used apps. Vivo have also included dark mode this time round and have done a great job with dark mode in the sense that not only does it affect all system apps, but it also affects some third-party apps too. But Vivo have also contradicted themselves a bit since dark mode is certainly darker, but it is not black, it is grey, which makes almost no sense since dark mode is not for aesthetics, but for aiding in battery saving since AMOLED panels feed off of black backgrounds. I'm not saying it doesn't lengthen the battery life, I'm just saying it doesn't do the best job at it. Speaking about battery life, the X27 comes packed with a 4000 mAh battery, which is right up there with top-end flagships. It is certainly a step up from its predecessor, the X23, which packed in a 3400 mAh battery, and it even outdoes its global brother, the V15 Pro, which only includes a 3700 mAh battery. Though the battery looks impressive on paper, the X27 is paired with a 10nm chipset, so don't expect efficiencies like seen with the new 7nm chips, but you can expect around 7 hours of screen on time with medium brightness levels. Should you need to refuel, there is a 22.5 watt charging block that comes packed in the box, which will boost your battery from 0 to 100 in around an hour and 30 minutes, which is not record breaking, but is still faster than many smartphones out there. When it comes to performance, the X27 is quick. Thanks to 8 gigs of RAM, it opens, closes, and switches between apps smooth and snappy. It has no issues jumping between social media apps with ease and has no problems running graphic intense games without any noticeable lag. Unless you're a competitive gamer, you will unlikely notice the difference between this and the best of the best out there, such as the new monster Snapdragon 855 chipset. Nevertheless, the more than capable 10nm Snapdragon 710 does a great job all round and once again outdoes its global brother, the V15 Pro, which is running a lower end 11nm Snapdragon 675 chipset. When taking figures into consideration, the 710 scored 173,000 in an Antutu bench run, which is comparable to the flagship Snapdragon 835 from 2 years ago. It is not the best score, but far from the worst, and benchmarks aside, the AI aids it very well at making it feel very top tier. Talking about AI boosting performance, it also boosts the cameras. On the back of the Vivo X27, we have 3 cameras in a vertical setup with no camera bump whatsoever. The first and most important camera is the main lens, which packs in a 48 megapixel Sony IMX586 sensor. This seems to be the new standard for great quality on budget smartphones, as this is the same great sensor we found on the Honor View 20 and Xiaomi Mi 9, which I stated trade blows with the kings out there, such as the Mate 20 Pro and Pixel 3 XL. This snapper has the widest aperture of the three at f1.8. In daylight, it takes some impressive photos which are full of detail and extremely clear, but for some reason they come out a bit washed out compared to the color-rich photos the View 20 and Mi 9 produced with the same camera. This is probably due to different AIs used. The camera is set to 12 megapixels by default, since it binds all 48 megapixels for a more detailed shot. I find the default mode better and easier to use. However, 48 megapixel mode can be enabled when in very good lighting for the best possible shot. When it comes to taking pictures at night, things come out noisy and grainy, but thankfully Vivo have included night mode, which not only dramatically brightens up the photo, but also boasts a lot more detail. Not only is it great to use at night, but also in dim lit indoor situations for that bit of extra detail and reduced light noise. The secondary lens is a 13 megapixel ultra-wide camera with an aperture of f2.2. This is another step up from its global brother, the V15 Pro, which uses an 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor. When clicking on wide in the camera UI, the scene in front of you becomes huge, allowing you to capture a lot more in the shot. When enabled, the camera switches from the default 48 megapixel main sensor to the 13 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, so expect a slight drop in quality. Other than the sensor allowing for very zoomed out shots, it also aids in taking pics very up close and personal to the subject thanks to the included super macro mode. The third lens is a 5 megapixel depth sensor with an aperture of f2.4. This is not an independent sensor, but rather works with the main or secondary lens in order to assist in depth mapping for better portrait and background blur shots. It does a fantastic job at it and gives the subject a nice natural pop. Moving on to video, we have 4K and 1080p. In the past, Vivo have always stuck to 30 FPS across the board, but they have now finally included 1080p at 60 frames per second, which makes for some smooth and clear recording. When it comes to 4K, we are once again limited to 30 FPS, but the videos still come out looking clear and full of detail. You can also record video using the ultra-wide sensor, but due to this being a secondary camera, we are limited to 1080p at 30 FPS with no option of 4K ultra-wide. When clicking on the camera flip button, your selfie camera gloriously appears on a pop-up mechanism with sound and lights to steal the show. Within the mechanism, we find a single 16 megapixel pop-up camera, which is actually half the count of its global brother, the V15 Pro. Specs aside, it actually does a pleasing job at capturing detail in good lighting, and even portrait mode works quite well thanks to built-in AI. Recording with the selfie cam is limited to 1080p at 30 FPS, and though it still looks clear enough, it is not close to the best vlogging selfie cam recorder around. The Vivo X27 lacks NFC, waterproofing, micro SD card support, wireless charging, and a flagship processing chip. Now that may sound like a lot, but it has some huge things going for it. It has an all bezel-less Super AMOLED screen with great color and brightness and full immersion thanks to the lack of bezels and notches. It has a headphone jack, mass amounts of storage at 256 gigs, 8 gigs of RAM paired with an above average 10nm Snapdragon 710 chipset that is still strong enough to handle all games lag-free and make for a snappy UI experience. It has more than decent software which has plenty room for customization. The battery has increased to 4000 mAh, which is paired with very fast wired charging. It also has an element of futuristic tech thanks to that mechanical pop-up mechanism with sound effects and LED lights, as well as a very snappy fingerprint sensor. It has a back that looks carved to perfection thanks to no present camera bump and a coating of color shifting paint that is sure to turn some heads. It takes some very good photos thanks to its new 48 megapixel sensor and has some very useful camera and video features. Most importantly, it has a very premium build with glass at the front and back. With everything the X27 has going for it, you would expect me to be able to recommend this as the best budget phone around. However, at $500 it is hard to justify compared to phones such as the Mi 9 and Honor View 20, which have the same camera capabilities and flagship processing chips at the same price point. But if you don't need the best possible chip around, the Vivo X27 beats the others in almost all things besides performance, making it one of my favorite budget-friendly phones around.